Hi, I'm Dr. David Day of Samurai Digital Security, and this is 404 Cybersecurity Not Found, tearing cybersecurity a new arse since 2015.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode. We're joined today by Dr. David Day, as always, and we're talking about red and purple and blue team exercises. So I think to start off with, Dave, for the lesser informed viewers out there, what's the basics? What are the blue, reds, and the purples?
When people talk about red teaming, they're talking about quite an aggressive form of penetration test, if you like. It's sort of your nuclear version of a penetration test. So whereas with a typical penetration test, your vanilla penetration tests, if you like, the idea is to determine what the vulnerabilities are with systems and to make the client aware of where the problems are so that they can put measures in place, or perhaps we can help them put measures in place to prevent the types of vulnerabilities which we identified. What isn't typical with a system penetration test is to actually go through and exploit those detected vulnerabilities. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that it carries some risk. If you actually go through with an exploit, there's never any guarantees that it's going to end in how you think it would end. So, for example, you might try to exploit a remote command execution exploit on a system. You may be expecting that would result in you taking control of the system. But when you're exploiting a system, it's not always dependable what the result is going to be. So it may just be that box crashes or breaks or in some other way stops responding, or just reacts in a way which you're not expecting it to. And as a result of that, particularly with it's why it's dangerous to do it with live systems. Okay, if your business is depending upon systems being live and you break them, there's a problem. Also, if you push through with exploits, there's a chance that you could pollute data. If it's a web server or web application server and you perform particular types of attacks like SQL injection or whatever it might be, stored cross-site scripting, that you actually damage the data that sits behind the application which you're testing. Your average system penetration test isn't a complete replication of what an attacker might do. And you tend to, also with a normal penetration test, you tend to sort of pull up a little short of the things that you could do. So, you'll test the public-facing IP addresses. You test web servers and mail servers and FTP servers, but you won't go the whole hog with a system penetration test. So in other words, you won't do things like, socially engineer members of the organization. You don't typically do spear phishing on the organization. You don't put USB sticks with malware in the car park. You don't try to deliver free gifts which are actually malicious, like a mouse. Sometimes, one of the tricks is, sending an ergonomic, beautiful looking mouse and saying, test this mouse out. And, you deliver it to the receptionist as a gift to trial, and they plug it in and test it out, and it harvests credentials and sends them to you. And then at the end of the trial, you ask them to fill a form in to say what you think of the mouse, and of course the form is infected as well. So there's a number of different ways in which you can manipulate people. And in a typical penetration test, you don't do that, right? In a red team test, you go the whole hog. You will exploit the vulnerability. You sit in the car park of the organization, and you capture Wi-Fi handshakes and try and crack them using GPU systems offline. We've got somebody who's pretty good at this, who wanders into organizations with a clipboard and a high-vis vest and tailgates people into buildings. And we had somebody do this so long ago with a banking organisation in London, in the city, and tailgated somebody in. It was a swipe card system. It was all very secure, but they tailgated somebody in and got in there and sat down at a desk that was empty, plugged their laptop into the network and started scanning the network. And there were sort of 30, 40 minutes in before somebody came over and said, "Excuse me, who are you?" And by that time, they discovered quite a lot. So, these are the kind of things that you could do, or you find a room, nobody's around, you install a webcam, to monitor keyboard strokes, that kind of thing. So it's basically red teaming is, with the agreement of the organization. Sometimes the only people that know about it are the managers. Sometimes you can hide it from other staff to be more realistic in terms of the results that you get. But it's far more aggressive. It's a lot more fun, actually. It's the time when penetration testers really enjoy themselves, because it's when they can actually uh, get all the toys out and really go to town.
So a pen test then is siloed to a specific system or technology with the goal of breaking just that system. And the red team expands the scope to the whole organization to get in any way possible. Is that right?
I'd say that's partly correct. So you're right in that it expands it to the whole organization, but it's the level of ferocity of the attack as well, or ferocity of the attack. They actually, with a red team attack, you will actually go through with the exploit and push through the other side. You have to be careful with that and make sure the appropriate caveats are in place in terms of when you do it, and make the client aware of the risk. But it's a much better way of replicating a real world attack. You don't pull up short. You don't get to the point of the vulnerability and say, this, if we exploited this, this would happen, or if we exploited that, we expect this would happen. We actually do the exploit, and then we can leverage that. So if it gives us access of internal systems, we can then start moving and pivoting around on the internal systems as well. It's really anything goes with a red team test. Sometimes you have to put certain caveats in there where there's risk, and that has to be discussed, obviously, with the client. But it's like it's a penetration test on steroids.
Hmm. So what's like the goal of the engagement then?
To try and compromise the systems in whatever way that you can, whether the systems are security of the organization, the actual how they vet people coming in and coming, going out, how they manage phone calls. So, we'll try phishing as well, voicemail phishing, to determine what the security culture of the organization is, and use any method to get in. Like I say, Wi-Fi handshakes, going onto the guest Wi-Fi, trying to move onto another system that might have access to somewhere else. Credential stuffing, remote desktop, whatever it might be, we go through with it. We push it through to the other side. How far can we take this? Not just making a note of where the vulnerabilities lie, exploiting those vulnerabilities to see what would happen and how far we could go if we really were malicious to get to the other end. So that's what a red team test is, and where it sort of differs, if you like, from a more passive, for want of a better word, penetration test. Blue, if you imagine it's a color spectrum, blue is on the other side of that. So red is when we're talking about the attacking side, and blue is when we're talking about the defensive side. So blue is about the tools that you put in place to try to protect against an attack. Specifically, the red team type activities. So blue team stuff is network intrusion detection, it's log analysis, it's system information and event management, which is so sim really is become so system information and event management has become one of the go-tos, if you like, in terms of tools and technologies and stacks to help protect organizations. It's not the only one. I'll mention some others shortly. This is where you look at logs, an awful lot of determining what's happening in terms of attacks, or even detecting attacks occurs through the analysis of logs. So we need tools to help us analyze these logs that record when somebody's logging in, when somebody's had a failed login, when somebody's accessed a particular system, when somebody's tried to access a particular system and failed, whatever it might be. So the idea behind SIM systems is that we all of these logs, which could come from firewalls, they could come from mail servers, they could come from desktops, wherever they might be coming from, these logs that are recording activity get sent to a central location. They're aggregated into one spot, and then they can be processed. The information within those logs can be processed, and alerts can be set up so that if something that's indicative of a malicious activity happens, you get to know about it. So if there's like some, if you have 40 failed login attempts in quick succession at 2 a.m. in the morning on a particular system, you may deem that to be, malicious. Somebody's trying to get in. And the thing is, if you see somebody trying to get in, right, if you see 40 attempts and then you don't see anything afterwards, right, it doesn't always mean that they've failed, right? They may have passed, they may have got in. And then, of course, you check in to see, have you had any people that have, you're having a look at successful logins. But remember, once somebody's logged in, they can then start to manipulate logs as well, which is why you need to take them out of band of the system that generated them so you can look at them independently. Of course, SIM systems can be compromised as well. But anyway, that's the general idea. And there's different options available. I mean, I think IBM have one called QRadar. Splunk's a very popular SIM system. There's open source variants which we like to use, like Elk, which has Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana in one, which is the log aggregation, the search facilities, and the processing in one package there. So that's what it's all about with the SIM systems, and they're sort of an integral part, if you like, of what they call a security operations center or a SOC. Quite often you have teams of people monitoring these systems for indications of malicious activity. Other things that might be part of a blue team could be network intrusion detection systems. They can work at the packet level and actually look at packets going into and out of the network. The traffic is mirrored or spanned, as they say. So all the traffic that goes to the different systems can be aggregated to a single point and examined by a system to see whether those packets contain indicators of malicious activity, whether it be the amount of traffic or the actual content of the packets themselves might have content which is known to be part of an exploit, or it may be part of the trait of somebody trying to find a vulnerability or exploit a vulnerability. So there's two parts to that, isn't there? There's the finding the vulnerability, exploiting the vulnerability, and then there's the payload that they use, right? If they once have exploited that vulnerability, how are they going to exploit it? Are they going to get a shell code? Or are they going to try and dump some data? What are they going to do? So sometimes the actual payloads themselves, the executables of the payload, the contents of those are going to sit within the packets that traverse the network, and you can look for them with network intrusion detection systems. So they're quite useful, and they can be fed. Also, the outputs of those can be fed into the logs of your SIM too, as can endpoint detection systems such as Bitdefender, or, as you know, Brad, we like Cynet. That can be fed through to SIM systems as well. And the endpoint detection is where the software actually sits on the individual hosts and servers and notices when some potentially malicious activity is taking place. And guess what? The SIM feeds from those, the log feeds from those can be sent through to a SIM too. So, between endpoint detection, network detection, and your SIM systems, they're the sort of the three key tools, if you like, that are used by security operations centers, and they're considered to be blue technologies.
What would you say the biggest attributors to success of those systems would be? If you had to boil it down to one thing, would it be the how advanced the technologies are? Would it be the integrity of the systems?
I think it's a combination of the technology, which is extremely important, but also the people that are using it. So expertise is incredibly important with analysis of data in terms of people trying to access your network or traversing your network, or even down to what sort of emails are coming in. I mean, like some of the higher end endpoint detection systems, Cynet and Bitdefender can actually monitor mail traffic and see if there's anything unusual happening in there, maybe some phishing or whatever it might be, or link analysis. If they see an email coming in with a link, they'll check that link if you click it before they send you to it to see whether it's safe. The endpoint protection is great, but particularly with log analysis, the info, and absolutely from network intrusion detection systems, and log analysis, it's a lot of data, and determining whether that data is malicious or not. Sure, the systems that you can put in place, there's a lot of rhetoric at the moment around machine learning and artificial intelligence that can do a little bit of the heavy lifting in terms of determining whether it's malicious or not. But ultimately, because every organization is different, every organization's patterns of traffic are different, every organization's methods of using their systems differ, it's really down to experience and expertise to have a look at what's happening in those files and decide, is this bad or not? you know and if you put yourself in a position where you're getting many and huge amounts of alerts frequently, then that becomes more difficult. You start to reach the point where you're looking for a needle in a haystack. So tuning these systems as well to just look for the key indicators of malicious activity is a skill within itself too. So as much as the vendors will try to convince you otherwise, there's no set and forget solution here. You set and observe, and it's still the case that you need expertise to observe. Um, so some amazing technologies, ELK, and the Security Union suite of tools, QRadar. These are all brilliant tools. Signet, an amazing tool, but you have to have the right people, you know, working in the background with these tools. You can't just put them in place and think, that's it then, we're sorted now, because
Hmm.
that isn't how it works.
Speaking to one of the guys earlier this week, Luke specifically, and we were talking about the effectiveness of endpoint protection and network intrusion detection, and he said there's always something it's always the last place you look if you're looking for your keys, and it's always the last place. And he mentioned that the coverage of these systems may be one of the biggest attributed to their success. If you're missing that old print server on the legacy systems, you think, oh, that'll be okay, it's over there, there's no problem. It's always in the place where you least expect. What do you think to that?
I think network intrusion detection systems in particular have had an awful lot of not bad press, but they've sort of fallen out of favor recently with the big push towards SIEM. My personal view is that's a mistake. And all you have to do is, if you look at the success of Darktrace recently, Darktrace is still, it's examining network traffic, right? We're still at the point where it's incredibly beneficial to have a look at the traffic that's on your network. SIEM will record events, and often it will record events where people have gained access. Obviously, it's good to know about it earlier. The sooner you know about it, the sooner you can start doing something about it. You can, contain the breach, eradicate it, get your systems back up and running quicker. The damage is reduced, but nevertheless, there is still damage. Oftentimes, with a network intrusion detection system, you can see evidence of attempted malicious activity earlier, very quickly. I mean, if you plug in your network intrusion detection system into your SIM, then so be it. That will work too. And you can segment it, right? So you can say, do you know what? One of the disadvantages, if you like, of network intrusion detection systems is the amount of processing power and the amount of storage that are needed for full packet capture. But what you can do is you can put them in strategic positions, right? So you put them next to your key intellectual property, your crown jewels, if you like, and just restrict it to just looking for attacks against that. They can be very useful for that point of view. So I still see them as critical, and I take Luke's point as well on that, in that you've always got ears on your network. If something's beaconing out messages and they don't look right, you're going to hear them with that network intrusion detection system. You're not necessarily going to see them with a SIEM if it isn't connected to a network intrusion detection system.
So we've looked at the values and requirements of a red team and a blue team, especially considering the things that are going on at the minute. What happens if those two join together into a purple team? Explain that.
Well, that's what it is. It's, you mix the colors red and blue, you get purple, right? That's the idea behind it. This is a situation where it's not perfectly real in that when you perform your red team activities, you let the blue team know, right? So you say, look, we're going to start doing, I don't know, some brute forcing of some passwords, or we're going to we're going to do some cred stuffing on some accounts. How much you want to disclose to the blue team is really part of the scoping exercise, if you like, for a purple team activity. Some organizations prefer to leave the blue team without that much information about what's going to happen. Just say, on this day, the red team are going to try and get in. You might want to keep an eye out for it. There's always some warning there. Otherwise, it isn't really a purple team. It's just a red team activity. And then you attempt to perform your attacks. The blue team attempt to detect what they detect, and you see, you have a wash up at the end. How much did you find? And if they missed things, then you think, okay, what can we put in place to prevent those being missed again in the future? And this includes everything, so it's easy just to think technology, but it is technology, of course, but also things like, your blue team exercise should also involve your blue team being able to ensure that people aren't wandering into the building when they shouldn't be. So, and sitting down at a desk and plug into the network. So there's a range of different activities that we've been through with red team, and the idea is in purple. You give the blue team a nod. How much of a nod is down to the organisation? Maybe you tell them we're just going to do some attacks on this day. Keep an eye out. Maybe you tell them we're going to do it this week. Maybe you tell them we're going to do it this month. Maybe you tell them the exact attacks you're going to do before you do them. And there's different benefits in each of those scenarios and methods of working it. And that's sort of agreed, before the attack. But the ultimate goal is always the same: to try to identify how effective the systems are in terms of detecting, the systems and processes are in terms of detecting you try to get access to data or intellectual property which you shouldn't be getting access to. And then at the end of that, either you decide to put new processes and systems in place, and or you have to learn to use the systems which you've got better. The expertise that sat behind them isn't doing what they should be doing. So they're the kind of wash ups you get from that. Um, and to be fair, this whole red, blue, purple team thing, this is from a penetration testing point of view. That's a pen testing team's dream. I mean, I was on a call this morning about, as you may know, Brad, about a purple teaming activity which we have scheduled, and the guys were just getting giddy. They love that.
So when we're talking about planning this engagement and identifying all the moving parts, who should dictate the engagement? Should the red team dictate their approach? Should it be the blue team, or is it the client that says, these are my rules, abide by them?
I think, well, the obviously the instigators of the trouble are the red team. So the blue team are reacting to what the red team do, and sometimes they have to try to decide what they might do next. So they see a pattern of activity and they think, okay, I think I know where they're going here, and then they sort of preempt what might be coming next, and that's it. That's a sign of a good blue team, right? That's where the individuals, the expertise comes in there. In terms of how it's organized, I would say that it has to be an agreement between the company that's doing the red teaming and the client, because the company doing the red teaming, as long as the documentation is all signed off to say you can do what you want, they're comfortable to get stuck in. But there needs to be an understanding between the two parties, between the client and the company doing the red teaming, as what the risks are, what the dangers are, what could go wrong, what the benefits of doing it a certain way are. The rules of engagement need to be decided between both parties, not necessarily the blue team, but definitely the client and the red teaming party.
If a client wanted the engagement to be done in a certain way, but it sacrificed the effectiveness of the engagement.
Depends why the client's saying it, doesn't it? I mean, the client may be worried about those systems. They may be worried about the fact that something might fall over and go offline. There's certain information that a client has that we might not have. They may understand the risks to their organization in a way which we don't, and there may be information we have that they don't have. So there has to be this knowledge transfer taking place, going both ways between client and organization. And of course, if we think the risk is worth it, we will put that view across. But ultimately, we can only do what's decided between us, and if there isn't an agreement on both parties, well, that's at the point where it ends. We don't step out of scope ever. That's how you end up in trouble.
Well, on that note, Dave, we'll close it up there. Thanks for your time, as always. So it's a pleasure listening to you. Until next week.
Okay. All right. Take care. Cheers, Brad. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Till next week.
This podcast was brought to you by Samurai Digital Security, purveyors of cybersecurity solutions. Find us at samuraisecurity.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. Samurai Security, tearing cybersecurity a new R since 2015.